And finally, your most extreme example is privately owned roads. These are actually, they used to be very common in the St. Louis area, particularly along the central corridor. I don't know how many of you are too familiar with St. Louis. Kind of the central west end, Clayton, U-City area. They're becoming much less common, but they still have plenty of neighborhoods where the homeowners own the road. And every 10 years or so, when it's time to redo the road, they assess all the property, generally according to frontage, and just pay for their own road. It's a very interesting way, sort of a very free market way to own your neighborhood streets. But as I said, it's becoming far less common as more and more often as those assessment periods come up, neighborhoods are trying to sign the roads over to their local city to pay for it. So, and finally, bonds backed by parking revenues don't always go to transportation, but they are they're a major way in which local governments in Missouri fund all sorts of improvements. They'll issue bonds based on their revenues at their local garages, local lots. In St. Louis, they do this enormously in St. Louis. They fund all sorts of things that you would never imagine have been funded by the bonds based on what you put into the meter. All right, now here we're gonna get, this is fun. I enjoyed putting this together. This is the average resident of Columbia, what you pay in direct annual taxes to transportation. So this excludes your 6-year driver's license. This is what you're gonna pay for 1 year. So what do you pay here? And here are our assumptions. You drive 15,000 miles a year, average 20 miles a gallon, live in a $100,000 home. These are your appraised values, not your assessed values. Own a $10,000 car and spend $10,000 a year on taxable goods within Columbia. You're gonna pay $138 in federal gas taxes, $129.75 in state gas taxes. Director Pete Ron of MoDOT was quoted a while back saying that if the average Missourian knew what their state gas tax bill was each year, they'd probably think it was a lot higher than it is. I certainly agree with that. I think the average person, if they were just guessing, would think they're paying a lot more than they are. You're paying $10.61 in road and bridge fund property taxes. These are not your other property taxes. And again, I keep saying it up because this is very, very low. This is certainly among the lowest in the state. By comparison, in St. Louis County, and it's a good comparison because they have transportation sales taxes there too, much like in Columbia and Boone County. Their sales taxes just a little bit lower than what you're paying in Boone County, and their road and bridge property taxes are more than twice as high as here in Boone County. So you're having very efficiently run road and bridge departments. Commend your local officials. You pay a $10,000 on taxable goods. You'd pay $100 in local transportation sales taxes. This would go to roads. A lot of this would go to your bus system too. You pay $57.53 for annual registration and license plates in the state. This was I used the assumption of the highest taxable horsepower, which most cars and trucks are in. If you have a particularly small car or a motorcycle, you're going to pay a little bit less than that. And you're going to pay $12.50 for a Columbia City motor vehicle tax, which could go into general revenue, could go into transportation funding. But in my research on Columbia, that's what we saw there. $448.39 in direct annual taxes for transportation. And there's certainly exclusions. There's general revenue in certain areas that can also go to transportation, but this is the most exact count I could get. I think a lot of people would think that they're paying more than that, but we have generally low transportation taxes in Missouri. We fund roads when we buy our car, register our car, fill the car up with gas. We pay an annual tax on the value of the car. Many states do not have that personal property tax. If you went back to that state-by-state MoDOT comparison, Kansas has it, Kentucky has it, and Nebraska has it, or something very, very similar to it. Nebraska has an annual motor vehicle fee that is basically the same as a personal property tax. We pay sales tax. Every time we fund transportation whenever we buy sales tax. Now this is not statewide. There are plenty of more rural counties and smaller towns in Missouri that don't have that transportation sales tax. Congressional earmarking. This is kind of a slide all to itself, but I wanted to throw it in there because it is very interesting. It's pretty self-explanatory how when they pass every 4 to 5 years a new highway authorization bill, how earmarks have just exploded. Now it's important to point out this does not automatically, this is not the only cause for the increase in spending. What it's really doing is it's taking the amount pledged to the transportation funding, and when there were only 10 earmarks, what they were doing is taking that pot of money and generally sending it to states and just saying to their state highway engineers, you decide how to spend it. What you have much more now of is congressmen are, after consulting with cities or constituents, are determining what needs to be spent. There's both good and bad to this. I certainly like the idea of elected officials accountable to the people making decisions on how to spend money. However, there's certain areas where I would more prefer engineers who are experts in this area to decide how to spend the money. I think generally with transportation, I prefer the latter, trusting it to the engineers and not to the interest groups of congressmen. But there's an argument both ways. And you can avoid that asterisk that referred to something that's not germane to here necessarily. All right. And feel free to pop up with questions at any point. How could we pay for our roads? In Missouri, we have a pretty set way. We do it by taxes, and we have no tolling except for the bridge, but other states are doing all sorts of a lot of ingenuity, creative ways to pay for transportation. And the problem here is that MoDOT has forecast an $18.3 billion revenue shortfall over the next 20 years. So this is an issue. Like, how are we going to address this long-term shortfall? And this is more than half. This is not 18.3 out of 1 trillion. This is more than half of their total projection of needs over the next 20 years. So this is a major amount. I actually think, though, that number should be recalculated. It was put together around 2007, and considering that the stimulus funds, for better or for worse, the stimulus funds are being used for a lot of those projects. And the Brookings Institution actually came out with a very interesting paper recently that documented how vehicle miles traveled per person were actually declining even before the energy spikes of 2008. So, but when you consider that travel is declining with higher energy costs, I believe if MoDOT recalculated this number, it would be slightly less. It, however, would still be an enormous revenue shortfall, and I don't question the seriousness of that problem at all. All sorts of ways that we could pay for our roads. One, higher gas taxes. Probably the simplest way. Gas tax has a lot of good things going for it. It's a good user fee. If you don't drive a lot, you don't pay for much of it. One interesting thing that could be thought of for Missouri is local option gas taxes, where cities could impose their own gas tax. I like the Tennessee model, which has a local option gas tax, but it's very limited. You can only impose a very small additional gas tax. This is compared to Chicago, which has authority for a local option gas tax. And when you combine Illinois' higher gas tax with Chicago's local option gas tax, with the fact that Illinois, unlike most states, levels sales tax dollars on the purchase of gasoline, you get there's a reason why Chicago has the highest gas taxes in the country just about, and there's a reason why when you have gas spikes, you see right across the line in Indiana, you see lines out like crazy with people waiting to buy gas in Indiana or up in Wisconsin before they go there. But with Missouri's low gas taxes to pay for our revenue shortfall, I think if we have to raise the state gas tax a bit, I don't think most people would really object to that. We do it with tolling. A lot of states are using tolling. It's becoming a little more common. What's really changing is the way people are starting to do tolling. The kind of enormous toll plaza collection booths that you might think of in the Northeast or Chicago are being replaced. Nobody would come into the state of Missouri and build a toll road or a toll bridge now that had manual collection booths, except maybe one far off to the right for the one car that doesn't have the easy pass or can't do the license plate billing that they do in other places. So it's much more faster and efficient with they found whenever they install these easy pass systems that the vast majority of people who regularly use that toll sign up for it very quickly.